Okay, Mr. Schirmer, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Johns Hopkins Hospital. And I know that you have a long history and strong ties with this institution. Both you and your family, you in particular, have a wonderful history that spans several decades with multiple operations. And you're very special to us because you're one of the original blue babies.
Mm-hmm.
And it is wonderful for me in particular doing blue baby operations these days to have somebody who actually has undergone that operation a long, long time ago and is actually a former patient of Alfred Blalock.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I hope I can help you out in any way.
It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
So we're going to go a little bit over the history of you, and let's actually start with your family. When does the history of your family tie with Johns Hopkins?
Well, I guess my mother, she had an uncle whose name was William Woods, and he was the chief carpenter that built Hopkins, the old original building on Broadway. In fact, he was the one that unlocked the doors when the hospital opened. And from what I understand, it has never been locked since that time. And I have some articles about him that I had brought down. They never really had a cornerstone, so he got permission to build a box, put items in it, and that box was sealed in the dome. And as far as I know to this day, that has never been found. It's still up in the dome somewhere.
I see.
But kind of an interesting...
And somehow it's linked to this blue baby that was
my
you.
mother's uncle, yeah. And I guess I think I was born with the disease, and I couldn't go too far. I'd walk 5-10 foot, and I'd have to sit down and gasp for breath. And my fingers would turn blue, my lips would turn blue. And our pediatrician at the time, Dr. Mansdorfer, he said he didn't think it was any hope for me. And he happened to read an article about Blalock and Taussig and recommended it to my mother. And we came down to Hopkins and were interviewed. And they said that I was a candidate. And in July of '45, I entered the hospital. I had the surgery. And at the end of July, I went home. And afterwards, it was like day and night difference.
Sure.
I could run around.
Do you have any recollection of that time in particular?
Oh, I remember it very vividly. Being in the hospital, the one guy, Vivien Thomas, who was Blalock's assistant, we used to call him the pricker man. And our room was like, it was like 6 cribs in the room.
Sure.
And we'd hear him coming down the hall because it was a very long, narrow hallway back in them days. And you could hear him clinking down the hall, and they'd holler, "Here he comes!" And we'd all run and hide. And he would come in, and he would prick the tip of your finger and take some blood and put it on like a little marble tray. Sure. And he would do that every day. And I guess that's the way
that will stick to my memory as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, we were all petrified of him. And in them days, too, we were all within oxygen tents. The tent took up half of the bed. Mm-hmm. So it was like from here on up. It isn't like today, the little hose that they give
Sure.
you.
Sure.
I remember being in that. And
so today you brought with you this wonderful scrapbook that was your mother's.
Yeah, my mother kept that while I was in the hospital. She followed that throughout the 40s. It's got clippings of all the different blue babies.
So we're going to just very briefly go through this in just, the first few pages. And in your mother's handwriting here, it describes your entry into the hospital.
Right.
You were born in May 1945. Excuse me, what am I saying here? So it says blue baby since May 1945.
Right.
And Michael was operated on July 16th, 1945 for blue baby operation by Dr. Alfred Blalock and Dr. Helen B. Taussig. Entered the hospital on July 14th and left there July 3rd. 31st. Yeah.
And she has down that I was the 28th, but I think it's I don't know,
yes.
Maybe it's
I actually looked at the operative list of the blue babies that were operated in Hopkins. You're number 29. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing, if you look at it, of those that preceded you, 10 died.
I know the one before me, and I think the one after me died. I'm not sure, but I remember hearing about that.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
In fact, the one before you died. So this one must have been a incredible challenge for your family as well, I'm sure.
I guess it was because my father was in the Navy and he was in the Pacific at the time. So it was just my mother, and we lived with my grandparents when I was growing up. And it was hard on her.
Sure.
And
You know, to offer an operation to a patient back in those days that had such a high mortality, but was the only chance of survival.
right, it was either, you take a chance or you're going to be dead, one or the other.
That's
so
right.
what do you got to lose?
And as you will tell us, that happened quite a few times along your life.
Happened a couple times, yes.
Sure.
And, but I'm grateful to the doctors. I mean, at that time, that's all they knew. And
Now, in the scrapbook, there's all these articles that your mother cut from newspapers and several languages too,
right,
that refer to the Blue Baby operation and to you in particular.
Judy, I knew Judy.
Judy Hackman.
Yeah,
She underwent the.
she was around the time of me. And I think my mother, although I don't have any letters in that, I think she kept in contact with some of these blue babies over the years. Because
Yes.
there's one page back here, I have a Christmas card from the one blue baby.
This is you,
Yeah,
yes.
that was me, but this was in a Czechoslovakian newspaper that my father seen in Chicago and cut it out and mailed it at home. And I have that full story that appeared in the paper here in town. Oops, this is it. This was
Yes.
from December of '48. They did an article, and then they also did an article about me with Life magazine.
That's right.
And
So here it says Blue Baby Romps, Michael Schirmer, 5.5 years old, used to be so weak that he couldn't walk 5 steps without sitting down and gasping. Now full of fun and play, he poses with his mother, Mrs. Jessie Schirmer, in a picture of Daddy. And this book just goes on and on.
this is the card
Yes,
from
your
Judy Poor,
Blue
which
Baby
was
colleague.
another blue baby in that, yeah.
Sure.
And it tells about people coming from France and Italy and flying over here for the operation. She must have got these clippings from I don't know where, but and it's various articles that appeared in like the magazines from the Sun paper and the News Post and things like that.
So you're now number 29 of what currently are more than 1,000 blue babies that have been done at Hopkins.
I'm an old dinosaur. And
Now-
I thank the good Lord every day for being here and the good doctors.
Right. Now, one thing I wanted to share during this interview is this wonderful letter that Alfred Blalock himself actually handwrote and mailed to you. And we have here with a 3-cent stamp. We've come a long way since then.
Yeah.
And this was when you, around, I guess, the holidays, sent him a gift.
Right. I had bought him I think that was a belt for him and for Christmas, and he sent me a note that he was wearing the belt, and he thanked me for it.
Yes, he's saying, I'm wearing it with great pride, and it was exceedingly nice of you to remember me. Best wishes for 1947.
Yeah, so this was December of '46 that he sent that.
Yes, sincerely, Alfred Blalock. And there's also a note at the same time by
That's from
Dr.
Helen
Taussig.
Taussig. I think my mother had gotten her a bottle of perfume and that, and she sent that thank you note.
That's wonderful. So let's go over to this Life magazine, March 14th, 1949, 20 cents at a time. And I'm going to just put in perspective how this is 60 years from ago, and you know what some of the issues that were discussed in this wonderful magazine were at the time. I mean, when I went through this, of course, I read the article where you're the hero there,
Yeah.
and Anna, the
Anna,
dog.
Anna really was the hero.
That's
'cause
right.
That's the one that they perfected the operation on. And I had many photo ops with Anna. We were in the newsreel with Anna, and it was shot down, I think, right on Wolf Street at the plot. And they had Anna out in the grass, and I was in a Cub Scout uniform at the time, and Anna was eating what looked to be like ice cream out of a cone, but actually it was dog food stuffed down into the cone with a little bit of ice cream on the top.
Sure.
So it looked like she was eating the ice cream in that. And
So when I went through this magazine, it was just fun to read and see other things that were around your article as well. I mean, here we have how we retired with $200 a month. That was excellent retirement plan for the time.
yeah,
The other thing that I saw is they have a big magazine, a big article on 20 years from the revolution in Russia, and they have a picture here of Molotov and Stalin, and those were the times. In this magazine, they also had the memoirs of Winston Churchill, the second to last.
right.
And then, of course, that was
The ads too were
the ads
really
were
something
unbelievable. Absolutely.
to look at the prices that they charge for different things.
Yes,
And,
and one thing that I noticed, and it sort of sets the background for the Blalock Taussig shunt and Vivien Thomas, and the time of segregation in America was when I actually saw this article, A Southern Solution: Can the Negro Problem Be Nationalized? This is where we were 60 years ago.
Yes.
And if you think that in the Blalock-Taussig operation, really we went far beyond, that segregation
From
idea.
what I understand, Vivien was only allowed in the hospital at certain times and to do certain things because of the segregation. He was
Yes.
of colored descent, but yet he was the one that developed this operation on the animals,
That's right.
and he made a lot of the tools that they needed for the
Yeah.
surgery because none were available. He would grind them down and do them. And I had heard stories that when Blalock first started to do this, he was unsure, and he said, "I'm not going any further until Vivien is here." And
Sure.
they brought a box in, and Vivien stood on a box over his shoulder and told him where to cut and what to do until he got proficient in it. And
I think in many ways the two of them surpassed a lot of the difficulties that were
Oh,
there
yeah.
at the time
Yeah.
between
yeah,
Afro-American and Caucasians. And so, going to the article that features you there at the beginning of the article, it was a wonderful article that is centered on you and Anna,
the dog, yeah.
the dog, who has been at Hopkins for a long time, apparently. And this is the picture of you. There you go. And do you recall that day?
I remember that day. Yeah, I remember when Life magazine came to the house and took several pictures, and then we went down to see the dog, and they took some more pictures and did the story. But that was
So in 1949, you were
I was 9 years old, so
9
this
years
is like
old.
4 years after surgery.
after the operation.
Yeah.
And Anne at the time was 7 and pensioned. I think she had finished her medical career. At
Oh,
the time.
Anna, yeah.
Yeah. So in the next page, it shows how basically experimentation on the animal and the actual surgery on
Yeah.
the blue babies was incredibly similar.
Very, very similar. I was surprised when I read that, and more so now as I got older and read it again, I understood more than what I did back in them days. But it was it's just mind-boggling what they can do.
Absolutely.
And I know I watch a lot of TV shows, ER and all the other stuff, and I don't know how the doctors can do some of the things that they do when they show you all this. I wouldn't know which one to clip or clamp or whatever. And
Sure. Well, these were really interesting times, and I think it took a lot of courage on the part of these surgeons and their co-workers to develop this operation and to eventually just basically went from the lab to testing it on small children like you were at the time.
Right, yeah. And I remember the operating room. It was like a big bare room with a couple tables and a light and that. And nowadays, the modern operating rooms, you've got computers and all this other.
Sure.
It's a completely different feeling. But that was so primitive because that was all that they knew at the time.
So do you recall going into the operating room and...
I remember seeing parts of I was drowsy, I think, at the time when I went in, but I remember being wheeled into this big white room with this table and a couple other little tables and all these people standing around, and then I don't remember anymore until I woke up in the oxygen tent. And it's just, my hats are off to everybody.
Sure. Now, did you see the movie Something the Lord Made?
I have a copy of that. Yes, that was an excellent movie. There was another movie that I think an independent firm did for public television, What Hath God Wrought or something. It was premiered over at Hopkins on Homewood campus several years back, and I went over to see that. The reason I knew about that is because my cousin was an alumni of Hopkins and got a newsletter, and he called me up. He said, this might be something you're interested in. And I called over there, and they said, well, come on over to it. And after they screened it, they asked anybody in the audience who was there, and a few of us stood up, and they came around and talked to us. And there was several Blue Babies that were in the audience, but I think I was the oldest one from the 40s. There were a couple from the 50s. I don't recall what their names were. But a couple of the doctors that were on the stage, I think, had something to do with some phase of the development of it. I don't remember what their names were.
Sure.
But
yeah, that was a wonderful production. I
yes, it
remember
was.
that.
Yeah.
And what were your emotions when you saw that movie?
I cried. I still do watching it, and I think Vivien got maybe the short end of the stick on that one. He wasn't recognized like he should have been because of the segregation policies and that. And I think they finally awarded him an honorary degree, but he was never made a doctor, or I don't think, if my memory serves me right. But
as you know, here at Hopkins, his portrait is right next to that of Dr. Blalock.
right, yeah,
Just like
and
it is in the
they
movie.
had an exhibit of his stuff at the county library a couple of years ago, and I called him up about it and went up to see it. And it had a lot of the original instruments that he had developed for the surgery. And I think Channel 2 News covered that and had a story. And that was very interesting. They were surprised that I called and said, well, I knew Vivien. And he was a gentleman. He was very nice. And without him, me and a lot of other people wouldn't be here because it probably would have never been developed.
That's right. That's right.
And,
Brilliant. How was your life right after the operation?
it was a lot better. Like I said before, I couldn't go very far, a few feet, and I'd have to sit down and gasp for breath. I would turn blue on the fingernails, blue lips. Afterwards, my mother claims I used to run up and down the steps. And we lived with my grandparents, and they had a long hallway. And I was taking drum lessons at the time, and I'd put a record on the Victrola and crank it up and put the drum on and walk up and down the hallway and beat the drum in time to the music and get on everybody's nerves. And then I could play a little bit of ball stuff. I never overdid it a lot, but I knew what my limitations were, so I really never forced it. But I was just happy to get outside and run around with the other kids because up until that time I didn't go out. I stayed in the house. And
So at that point, you really felt normal.
yeah, I felt a lot normal after the surgery and that, and everything went fine. And that lasted for 20-some years until 1966 when I had an episode, and I came down to see Dr. Cowley at university, and they checked it out, and they said, well, you're either going to have another heart operation or within 6 months you'll be dead. And I thought, well, what have I got to lose? Take a chance. So we did it, and it was a 14-hour open heart. Dr. Cowley did it at university, and it was a hole in the wall and a blockage in the one vein or artery, whatever it is. And that lasted until, I think it was about 95 or 96. And I was out front cutting the grass, and I started sweating and breathing hard and that, and I came in and sat down, and a few minutes went by, and I was still sweating, and my wife says, I don't like this, we're going to the hospital. Well, they took me down to the hospital, and they stabilized me, and they kept me all night for observation. This was Mercy. And the next morning they come in, they said, we're going to send you up to Union Memorial for a electrophysiology study. So they took me up there, and they did that, and the doctor came in. His name is Dr. Shamp, And he says, we're going to put a defibrillator in you. So they put me back in the operating room and put the defibrillator in. And the first one lasted like 9 years. I guess the bunny stopped beating the drum after 9 years, and about 2 years ago I went back in and had it replaced. When I first got the defibrillator, a couple months after that, I remember very vividly one night I got up to go to the bathroom, and I'm walking around the foot of the bed, and it went off. And it woke my wife up, and she said I was standing at the foot of the bed, and she says, I lit up like a church. And I didn't know what to do. I was aware of the situation, and all I could see was this tunnel of white light. And it looked like I was going through it, and it looked like the end was getting closer to me. People talk about
The proverbial
the
tunnel.
near-death
Sure.
experience. And while I'm going through that, all these things are flashing in front of my mind, my life. And I got so far to it, then all of a sudden it stopped, and I went backwards. And then I came out of this thing. And I was petrified. I didn't know what to do. So she got on the phone and called the doctor, and he said, get him over to the hospital. So I went over, and I was there for a couple days, and they monitored it and checked it out. And they had to adjust the medication. And it went off now and then for a period of a year or two until we got it under control. But knock on wood, it hasn't gone off in the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
And
we don't want to see you live
no,
like a
I don't
Christmas
want
tree
to.
here.
No, I don't want to light up again.
Although it's almost Christmas.
No, I don't want to light up again.
Now,
but
let me take you back 1 second to 1966. Before the operation, did you think that was going to be all that you ever were going to need?
Yeah, at that time I did. I was very active in different things. I've been doing magic. I've been in magic over 50-some years. And I was doing shows, scout banquets, blue and golds, nightclubs, birthday parties, all kinds of things like that. And I was doing a blue and gold scout banquet one night. And in the middle of the act, I felt real funny. So I ended the show and came home and told my mother at the time. I wasn't married yet. And she took me to the doctors, and he sent us down to Dr. Cowley, and then that's when they told us about that.
So how did you feel knowing that at that point you had either no hope or, again, an operation, which in 1966
so
was
I figured,
fairly risky?
Well, I mean, it was a 50-50 chance. If I don't do nothing, I know I was going to die. Take a chance. I might beat the odds and live again. And apparently I've been beating the odds, or I'm too ornery or something. And
how did your mother feel when you were reoperated?
I guess it took a
back in
toll.
the operating
I
room?
guess it took a toll on her, and I was petrified. I was scared to death. And then when I got out of that, everything seemed to be fine. I got married, and I was concerned when we got married and we had children that the children would inherit this. And I went to Mansdorfer and talked with him, but thank God both of the kids are fine.
Sure.
And in fact, they're both married, and I have 3 grandchildren now. And that's what keeps me going. It was my wife that later developed cancer, and that just spread through the body, and then she passed away about 6 years ago. And since that time, I sold my house and moved in with my daughter, and that's where I'm at right now. So.
Okay.
And I retired from work, so I just do my magic now and then and sort of irritate or bother everybody.
So you've had a very productive life, even though there's been these, several bumps along the road that you surpassed with flying colors.
But you learn to live with them.
Sure. What is your advice now to patients, families, children who are faced with heart disease, who have to go to the operating room for correction? Again, these days we do the blue baby operation in very selected cases in newborns, very small children. But what's your message to those families?
I would say if there's any chance, take it. I mean, medicine has come so far over the the last 30, 40, 50 years, and that there's so much that they can do. And to me, it's worth a chance. I mean, you don't have anything to lose. I mean, if you don't do it, you're going to end up dead or bedridden or something. So why not take a chance and put your faith in the doctors and God and go from there.
Great.
So I would say don't hold back. I know it can be very I don't know, frustrating and to the parents and that, what are we going to do and this and that and the other thing. But I think just put the faith in the Lord and the doctors and take a shot. 9 times out of 10, it'll come out for the better.
Hopefully more than that.
Yeah,
would say.
But there's always, you know,
But
there's
back in
always
those days, it was really a 50-50.
Yeah, it was a roll of the dice back then. You took your chances and...
Yeah. I mean, your mother didn't know that the child right before you died, and of course the child right after you died. So
No, she didn't know that until it was time for me to go in.
Sure.
And I don't know whether they ever told her that until later on.
Sure, but I mean,
So,
it must have been, you know, you were in a ward with 6 other kids. You all were going at the
Yeah, we were
surgery
all-
at the same time, and
Yeah, within a day or two of each other, and we were all there. And afterwards, we used to ride around in big old wheelchairs. And we'd be riding around, and we'd hear Vivien coming, and we'd all shoot back to the
Sure.
room and hide.
Sure.
It was a lot of fun back in them days, a lot of pleasant memories.
So you were a patient here in the 1940s, of course, and then you were at Maryland for that time around your 14-hour operation for correction.
Mm-hmm.
When is it that you came to Hopkins again?
Well, maybe about 10 years after surgery, I would come back like every 6 months for a checkup.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the Halstead Clinic or something.
Yes.
And I would see Dr. Taussig. Every now and then Blalock would pop in and they would do tests. I remember the old, I think they called it fluoroscope. They'd give you this chalk and you had to hold it and swallow it, and they'd take pictures of it going down. Oh, that was the worst stuff. I gagged, and that was terrible. And then they used to do a thing called arterial leg puncture, where they take me back and they jam me in the crotch of the leg to the artery, and the needles they used looked like horse needles. And they take this tube of blood, I guess it was for studying it.
Sure.
And for about a month after they would do that, I would have a big black and blue mark. I used to hate that.
Sure.
And when they'd come in and say, we're going to do that, I'd run the other way and they'd have to catch me.
It's hard not to develop white coat syndrome with that, right? I mean, to be afraid of doctors is a
Yeah, you were afraid of
youngster
them
growing up.
at the time, but now I just put my faith in them, and sometimes I don't like some of the stuff that they do, but it has to be done. And
Sure. But the needles are much smaller these days.
oh, the needles are much smaller, yeah.
Did,
sometimes you don't even feel them, but back in them
Sure.
days, they were big. And
Sure. Now, how have you seen the hospital change over all these years, from then to now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the old hospital was very sterile, long corridors, very plain rooms.
Sure.
Your modern day hospitals now, it's just like going into a hotel. And it's a lot different. In fact, last December and January, I spent several weeks in and out of St. Joseph's with this AFib.
Mm-hmm.
I was having trouble breathing. They put me in for a couple of days and monitor it and send me home. And a week later or so, I'd be back in. So finally, we got that rectified, and I have oxygen now at the house, but I only need it at night when I sleep, because when I would lay down flat, I think they said something about the lungs would collapse a little bit, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night gasping for breath. So now I have a wedge that I put my pillow on, and I have oxygen on a hose. It's a big, looks like a humidifier, a concentrator. And I just put that on when I go to bed and turn it on, and I sleep all night long.
Sure.
In the morning, I turn it off and go about my day's work.
Sure. Have you met any of your Blue Baby colleagues over the last few years?
No, there was a couple at that airing of that movie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall what their names were. I know my mother used to keep in touch with some of them,
Sure.
but since she passed on and that, I have no idea who's living or who's dead, or I know some of them probably moved away. I would love to see some of them from back then just to say hello.
Sure.
A couple of them did call me when they did the thing at the library on Vivien. They had read the story and called, and one had a son who was a blue baby, and one was a gentleman who was a blue baby, but I think he was back in the 50s or 60s later on. But I never had any more contact with him. No.
Must be wonderful, an amazing feeling that you guys share, and just
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many of
amazing
us
link.
are left yet.
Sure.
And when I had the defibrillator put in, I was all upset about that. I thought, well, this is the end, because usually they put them kind of things in, and you read in the paper a couple months later the person passes on in that. And I said something to the doctor, so I've since that time signed papers, and I'm donating my body to science. I said, I don't know whether you want my body. It's been through so much. And he says, no, you're a walking history book. He said, the doctors can learn by examining. I guess they can, I don't know. But anyway, they're going to get me when I go.
That's so many years from now. Okay,
I hope so, yeah.
Sure.
But again, that's in the hands of another man.
Sure.
And I'm just thankful for every day.
Great. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you is what is your recollection of Dr. Blalock and Dr. Taussig? You talked about Vivien Thomas.
Right. I remember meeting with them several times in Blalock's office. And we used to go, they used to have these meetings about doing things with the dogs. These at the War Memorial, they'd have these demonstrations. The SPCA were, and they would take a few of us down there and put us up on stage and talk about how the animals saved our lives and stuff like that. And of course, Helen Taussig, I seen her every year when I went back for checkups and that. She was a very soft-spoken woman. Blalock always had his pipe. I remember.
That's right.
His pipe and that, and he was again very soft-spoken, but very, very nice. But I never seen that much of them. I had more contact with Vivien than I did. They would come in and check you out and disappear. Vivien was always around, and we'd tease him and he'd tease us and things like that. But I can remember going to a couple, I guess it was in the hospital somewhere, these amphitheaters, and they would talk about the surgery, and they'd bring us down, and we would talk, and the doctors would be there. And I remember some of them.
Have you ever seen an operation or been in an operating room, not as a patient?
No.
Would you like to?
I guess so. I don't. I mean, sitting up high and looking down.
Yes.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I've seen
Kind of what they did with you back then.
Yeah, back then they had audiences and
Sure.
that, but I've never seen an operation as an operation. I mean, I've been in the operating room a couple times,
Sure.
but of course you go in, they knock you out, and you
Sure.
don't see anything.
Maybe at some point I can invite you to see maybe when we correct the Tetralogy of Fallot.
I would love to see that. That
Sure.
would be something very interesting, I think.
You know, and we know that if you start feeling a little dizzy, you still have a defibrillator.
Yeah,
So-
well, I don't want to. I don't want to aggravate that either. But I would just close my eyes if it got
Sure.
too bad.
Well, you know, we've come a long way. Now we do this operation. The operation that you had when you were in your 20s, we do now within 6 months of age, most of the times, in babies.
Wow.
So actually it's the rare case now that we do a Blalock-Taussig shunt. Most of these kids are kids that cannot be really corrected later on in life. So
Shame.
it's, but you know, we just do alternative surgery basically. We have, you know, we correct them in a different way, but the first stage is still a Blalock-Taussig shunt, a blue baby operation. But a child like you with Tetralogy of Fallot, today we would just operate on without going through a shunt.
No,
But when you actually had the operation, there wasn't the possibility of complete repair
I don't think they knew that at the time. This was
until the
really
50s,
groundbreaking technology.
until the mid-50s. That's right.
And to look at the pictures of the operating room back then and the nurses and that, and to look at it today, it's
Oh yes.
completely different. It's
So along those lines, I'm gonna give you two things from the division of cardiac surgery, and then we're going to ask something of you, okay? So the two things that I'm going to give you are, thank you, just one second. So you were talking about the operating room back then.
mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give you a picture on behalf of our division of the blue baby operation. And what you see here is actually Dr. Blalock performing a blue baby operation.
And this is Vivien here.
This is Vivien right behind him, who's standing behind him.
Right.
And this is Dr. Taussig, and this is Alfred Blalock doing a blue baby operation in the 1940s.
Yep. I can remember certain things like that big difference from today.
Yes, this is Denton Cooley, who was one of the most famous cardiac surgeons, who was assisting him as an intern. This is Dr. Longmire.
I think this might have been the one gentleman that was at the thing over at Hopkins. Does he have red hair?
Well, right now he's lost a lot of it.
Well, I know,
He's
we all have lost
89,
that.
I think,
yeah,
right
we've
now.
all lost. But it was a few of them that were there that
Yes.
day that were involved with it.
Yes.
And they were very interested, and they talked with me afterwards. But
Sure. There was Dr. I think Baker, and Dr. Gott, I'm sure you've probably met back then. He was a chief of cardiac surgery, very tall
Probably.
gentleman. And I mean, Dr. Cooley is one of the pioneers in open heart surgery. And he was the intern at that time assisting Dr. Blalock. It's remarkable to see Blalock and Vivien Thomas right behind him like that.
And this is Taussig right here.
Yes.
That is wonderful.
So I'm going to give this to you.
Well, I thank
From
you
all of
very
us.
much. I will treasure this. This is I had nothing like this to show my kids and grandchildren and that, and they keep asking now and then, what are all them scars for? And
But you see, this operation was, we believe, in 1945. So you may as well have been you down there under the drapes.
could very well have been. You don't know.
Yes.
I don't know what the patient was, but
Yes.
yeah.
So this is one gift we want to give you. And the other one is actually this vase with this African violet. And this has a very particular meaning for all of us at Hopkins. Basically, this was Dr. Blalock had an African violet in his room, in his office. And Vivien Thomas was attending to this violet. And when Dr. Blalock retired in 1964, he gave this violet to Vivien Thomas. And from then on, this African violet has been at Hopkins from 1964. I was not even born. I was born in 65. From 1964, there's been this violet at Johns Hopkins. And it's been cut, and it gets nourished every year since 1964, for 45 years.
That's remarkable.
So this comes originally from that violet that Alfred Blalock gave to Vivien Thomas. And this is for you.
Well, thank you very much. I will take that home and have my daughter take good care of that for me.
Excellent.
That's very, very nice. Thank you very much. I
My pleasure.
appreciate that.
Okay, I'll hold this for you. You know, all of us, all the cardiac surgeons at Johns Hopkins actually have an African violet in their office.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So,
It's fascinating how that one plant can be regenerated year after year and goes on and lives on.
And of course, you know, this is very important to us, as I hope it will be for you. And we have a set of instructions for you
Oh, okay.
of how to take care of it, and the meaning, and you know, all the history of the African violet at Johns
Wonderful.
Hopkins.
Thank you.
Now, in return for that, you're going to have to do something for us. All right?
Okay. Well, I said I had been in magic for a number of years, and I'll show you a little magic trick. First of all, I have to find can you bring that Fallot over a minute? I want
Sure.
to get a piece of the dirt. And if I place the dirt in my hand and I squeeze, okay, you can put it back. I can actually cause that piece of dirt to enlarge and change color.
It's amazing.
Now, if I take that and I pull on it a little bit, I get two. I'm going to take this one and put this one in my hand. I want you to hold on to that one. Squeeze it tight, likes to be kept warm.
Okay.
You have one and I have one, but they're kind of affectionate. They're never apart very long. In fact, did you feel anything?
Not really.
Open up.
That is amazing.
So
Can we do this with $10 bills too?
I wish if I could. In fact, what I'll do, I'll take one, two. I'll put two in my hand. Wait a minute. Let's start all over again. I'm going to put one in my hand. No, I'm going to put two in my hand. I'm going to go in my pocket and get some magic powder. This is what we call wiffle dust. Some people call it lint, but we sprinkle that over it. And how many did I put in my hand?
I think two.
Two? No, so we don't have any in.
I'm glad I didn't give you a $10 bill.
I wish you would.
That's
It's
wonderful.
a lot. I don't do a whole lot of the big stuff anymore because of my condition and that. I got rid of most of the bigger props, so I just keep smaller things. And I go to the Magic Club every week, and we all sit around and have soda and pizza and do tricks and aggravate each other. And
That's wonderful.
it's a lot of fun. I've had a lot of enjoyment with magic. I spent several years as a professional on the road, and then the rest of the time I worked locally. And it was a lot of fun. Gave us extra spending money for vacation or things like that. And the kids loved it. I had my daughter in the act at one time, and we're doing a show at the Moose, and she's sitting in the front row, and she's telling all her friends, now watch, he's going to produce a bird, he's going to do that. And I said, you can't tell them what I'm going to do. That's a secret. So she doesn't do that no more. She just tolerates it.
Sure.
But the grandson, he's starting to get interested in it. So
So how many grandkids do you have?
I have three. I have a grandson that's 11, Matthew, and my other daughter has two girls. Hope is 5, and Olivia is about 1 year and 4 months, and she's into everything.
With the biggest of your grandkids, have you shared the Blue Baby operation story?
Yeah, his mother has told him about it, and I've told him about it. He often asked about the scar and that, and I tell him, and he kind of, you know, how kids are. But
it's a great story to share. Well, I wanted to thank you for coming today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I hope whoever watches this gets something out of it.
Sure. It's really been a privilege to spend some time with you and learn about this wonderful life of yours.
Thank you for asking me. I'm glad I could make it and come down and help other people out.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Appreciate everything. Thank you.